Hey everybody, Eric Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is my review of the SIG Romeo M-17. This video was already previously seen by my Patreon supporters. Not every video, as you guys know, although I keep having to remind people, goes to YouTube these days. Usually I put out about one a month. Everything else is Patreon. So if you want to get videos first and you want to see videos that no one else is ever going to see, consider supporting Sage Dynamics on Patreon. Patreon.com/Sage Dynamics, and thanks. So let's get to a review of the SIG Romeo M-17 optic. You guys saw the first impression video. The nature of the optic is, on the outset, a little bit aggravating for some people because it is the most proprietary mounting system currently out there. If you don't have a firearm that will accept an optic that takes the SIG lock system, then you can't run it. Now, the caveat to that is there's people like Icarus Precision working on being able to mill guns to accept this optic. They've already got some prototypes, they're testing them, and eventually they're going to be offering that as a service. I know it's going to be available, obviously, for SIG and Glock. I don't know what other brands are going to be out there. Of course, that all factors into if you want the optic or not. It is an enclosed optic. It is the optic that SIG created for the handgun for the military, for the M17, M18 pistols. And the way that I got one was SIG sent me one on the slide already. Everything was mounted, everything was good to go. Of course, I checked it just in case, and then I put it on a Wilson Combat frame, and I started the review process. So that's how I ended up with one. They are available. Occasionally, you'll see them pop up for sale. But again, if you don't have the pistol with this that proprietary footprint, you can't mount it unless and until the aftermarket provides a solution for that. So on the outset, it's a smaller category of people who are going to be available to even use the optic, at least for right now. Of course, if you're watching this video from the future, that may not be the case anymore. So we're already kind of we're at the foot of a very tall hill. Is it going to be worth the climb, considering how specific I have to be in order to mount the optic? If I'm a Walther guy, or if I'm a Springfield guy, or a 2011 guy, for right now, I can't do anything with this optic. The future, hopefully, will provide a solution for that, or in the future, SIG may produce a civilian version of this particular optic that's going to have like a Delta Point Pro footprint or something like that. So just getting in the review, just know that we are dealing with a very small demographic, but because the optic existed, and I was kind of impressed with what I saw as far as performance, and of course SIG's put out a bunch of great, actually really cool videos on the M17. I wanted to know how well it was going to perform and if it was going to be a contender in that enclosed optic category. Being that the optic is literally expected to be mil-spec, you expect mil-spec-like performance. As far as features go, one of the first things that's curious about it is the adjustments. They are tactile click, which is helpful and useful, but they're 1.5 MOA, and that's kind of aggravating math when it comes to zeroing a handgun from either 25 or even 10 yards, because MOA doesn't really break down that well from those distances for those measurements, but it's not the only optic that departs from those 1 MOA adjustments that you commonly see on pistol optics, so zeroing it wasn't that big of a deal, but there was a slight bit of frustration there. It's powered by a 2032 battery, which is side-load, a very robust battery cap, which we'll get to. And the reticle is a 2 MOA dot, or an optional 2 MOA dot with a 32 MOA circle, or just a 32 MOA circle. So in the future, if you want to mount this on something else, maybe like a shotgun or something, eventually somebody may make an interface footprint for that if it becomes readily available. The reticle options are going to be more valuable for you then. Reticle brightness is fantastic. It has basically the shake-awake system. It's got those recess buttons. I talked about that in the initial impression video if you saw that. As far as adjustments go, very intuitive. Battery life is going to be what you would expect, especially from something that kind of just turns itself off when it's not in use. If it's just sitting in the safe or it's in the arms room or whatever, you're not going to start draining that battery significantly until you pick the optic up, put it in a holster, start carrying it. For battery life, you're looking at 20,000 hours, which isn't the oh my god number that you hear from some optic companies, but if you do the math, 20,000 hours is more than a year. And to me, that's always kind of been the standard for battery life. I got a 7075 aluminum housing. It's an enclosed optic, and it's sealed and purged. So if you want or need an optic that's enclosed and purged, it's going to check those boxes. Another big thing worth talking about, because this is something that a lot of people are looking for, and it's something that well, is preferable if you can make it happen. The optic sits low enough that you can use traditional height sights, so you don't have to use suppressor height sights with it, which is a feature, like I said, that some people are going to be preferable for. One thing that I found, I personally don't care, because I'm just so used to shooting red dots. So suppressor sights, whatever, or standard height sights, whatever. I don't use the sights unless I'm using the sights. But from a teaching standpoint, because I am an instructor first, it is much easier, relatively speaking, to instruct someone on acquiring a red dot from the draw stroke if they're used to traditional height sights without that conflict of suppressor height sights changing their ultimate presentation based on sight that they're looking for. Because everything sits lower, people are more likely to find that reticle if they're using a traditional draw stroke that they've been using to find iron sights. Now, you shouldn't use your irons to find your red dot, but you got to start somewhere. So getting people kind of up to speed is a little bit more efficient on a setup like this, where the sights are in the traditional height, than it would be with suppressor height sights. Doesn't mean you can't do it both ways. It just means that from square one or day one or whatever you want to call it, it can be a little bit easier in a configuration like this versus suppressor height sights or a taller optic overall. Of course, another big selling point is it's American made and it's mil spec. Mil spec. Mil spec is different from my spec. I'm doing my standardized duty testing. For video purposes, you guys know it's going to be 2,000 rounds. I'm going to do a drop test every 500 rounds during that, getting a basic feel for that optic in those first 500 rounds. Dot brightness is what I would expect. It could stand to have one or two brightness settings and went a little brighter, but using just the center reticle or the combined reticle, I didn't have any issues picking up the reticle regardless of lighting conditions on the range. I would like an extra brightness setting just in case, more of a thing like it gives you just enough, but I always kind of think about what if, let me get one more brightness setting just in case. Unfortunately, it's not something it gives me, but that's not necessarily a deal breaker as far as reticle goes. The glass is very clear. There's not really a noticeable notch filter to it. Very little aberration or distortion when presenting in more atypical presentations where the dot's not perfectly centered in the window, like when I'm shooting one-handed or something like that. Sometimes the dot just doesn't come in perfectly textbook centered in the window. And if a optic has aberration or distortion at the edge of the glass, that's usually when I notice it. Not an issue with the M17. Refresh rate is excellent. Notice that definitely during recoil, but it's also something I pick up when transitioning from target to target or changing rapidly changing points of aim. That's where refresh rate is really going to show. And the thing about refresh rate is either it bothers you or it doesn't. And people used to never talk about it, and then suddenly everyone started talking about it, which is good because everybody's becoming more educated on red dots. Refresh rate is a factor in the acquisition of the red dot when transitioning target to target. That's usually when you notice it, where basically the dot's pulse rate is set for conservation of battery life or some other factor, usually battery life related, or it just could be the quality of the emitter. The electronics, again, I'm not an engineer, so I can't go too deep into that. But I didn't have any noticeable flicker or fading, even under night vision or low light, which we'll talk about, where I didn't have a reticle exactly when I needed it, or it wasn't available for when I was going to need it. So after that first 500 rounds, we got to the burn down, which is 500 rounds as quickly as possible to see if that accelerated rate of fire will identify any issues that the same round count would not identify over a much longer period of time. So 5 to 6 minutes versus 5 to 6 days, hours. You guys have heard this before. Here's your burn down. know if I've said it before, but I absolutely hate doing burn downs on semi-automatic magazine-fed handguns because it takes a long time. And it's not really friendly on the hands. But I did get it done, got the 500 rounds out. Luckily, I have exactly enough 21 round SIG magazines to make that happen. And I didn't identify any issues. Another thing, especially with handguns, even though most of the heat is going to be chamber forward, it does generate a lot of heat and it starts to sink towards the rear of the gun. And I've had optics in the past where once the optic itself warmed up from that accelerated rate, and keep in mind, 500 rounds through a handgun in that short period of time is completely unrealistic. But it's interesting, right? So I've had optics that heated up and it started to affect my ability to perceive the reticle. Like the heat was actually affecting the performance of the electronics inside. Not an issue with the M17. It maintains 0. At this point, I already have 1 drop test and then a 500 round burn down. So I'm at 1,000 rounds right now, and it's just cooking right along with boring reliability. Getting into the last 1,000 rounds for video purposes, I wanted to do some low light, obviously, and I wanted to get some night vision in there. Low light is way more important to me because the demographic of people who are going to use a handgun under night vision is a very, very small category of people. However, if you have night vision and you have handguns, this is something that might interest you. And shooting handguns under nods is just super fun. It's also a good way to teach yourself really good acquisition of that dot, because if you can pick up your reticle under night vision, you should have no problem picking it up during the day for proper presentation. But under low light, again, I don't have like an auto adjustment feature that I'm dealing with here, so I'm using a brightness setting. What I generally do with all my optics is I pick a brightness setting that works well in every lighting condition I'm likely to encounter, and I leave it there. And that's exactly what I did with the M17, except aside from when I played with the brightness settings to see how well they were overall performing. For low light, the reticle is exactly what you want, the best night sight ever. If you're pushing lumens downrange, pushing candela downrange, it's not going to wash out needlessly as long as you're using a proper brightness setting. And that's where user intent or user prior experience or experimentation comes into play. If you're going to use something like this for home defense or duty carry or concealed carry, you should test how the dot brightness you think is going to work against your weapon light or your handheld light and your ambient lighting conditions. The M17 performed great, no issues under low light. Under night vision, I don't use night vision settings because I've spent more of my time not in the military than in the military using night vision, especially my time being a cop. And we had this issue where, at some point, especially in law enforcement, you're going to have to transition from night vision to white light at some point. Once everything's done and all the sneakiness is taking place and everybody feels really cool, it's time to actually start affecting arrests, turning lights on, processing evidence, search warrant, all that stuff, right? So at some point, we called it going green to white. If I go from night vision to white light and my optic's in night vision setting, I now have an additional task. I have to turn my optic up in case I need it. So I don't use them, but I do test them. These might be some of the best, cleanest night vision adjustments I've seen, or night vision settings I've seen, which you would expect because this is that mil-spec optic that SIG is kind of providing for the military. I don't really know what else I can say about it. They're very clean, very minimal halo. Again, the night vision device matters, so if you have a lower quality tube, you might not notice the difference. I'm running mine, I have very good white phos, and I'm running green phos, the one I filmed through. And reticle behavior, reticle blooming was minimal, reticle presentation was excellent, and it'd be kind of what I'd expect from a night vision setting that's kind of mil-spec. The SIG says they work best with Gen 3 tubes, which I don't have a Gen 2, so I can't check it. But I would tend to believe that is just generally true across the board, not necessarily just about this optic. So if you're interested about the night vision settings, they're fantastic. One of the issues people bring up is light transmission. Light transmission doesn't matter that much if you're running binos, right? So if I'm running binos, I don't really notice how well light transitions through my dominant eye because I have a non-dominant eye also looking downrange. Running this on a monocular, my Green Phos 14, light transmission is good. The window is a little bit smaller, but you don't really see the window. You just kind of see the dot. The whole gun itself is just kind of blurry because of the way night vision focus works. I didn't have any issues running that, any issues shooting with it. It's hard to see it on film, and I know I've said this before, filming under night vision is aggravating to me because you can only film the quality of the night vision with the accessory that you have to mount it. So no matter how good your camera is, you're still filming the night vision. You're not filming with night vision. unless you get a dedicated night vision lens, and even then, you're dealing with the quality of the image intensifier tube. So it doesn't really come through just how excited I was, like visually, about how well this thing performs under night vision, but it is really excellent. Of course, that last 500 rounds is just more continuation of practice that I'm going to do. I like the SIG handgun. I like shooting the SIG handgun. And this particular setup, I don't know what it is. It may just be the mil-spec slide or a combination that I, finally found, that Goldilocks combination with the Wilson Combat frame. I don't have any grip modules in here, the weights or anything like that. And this is one of the first stock guns I've had, or it's not ported or comped, is where I'm going with that, where it didn't feel oversprung. So shooting this gun is just really fun, and the optic makes it very enjoyable because I've got a window size that's generous but not too large or larger, and I just get really good performance out of the firearm. I'm able to acquire and get the hits that I want. Distance isn't an issue. Because I shoot with both eyes open, as you should, using the red dot, even if there was an issue with the overall lens quality, clarity, or notch filter, how much light's making that transmission through the light, I don't think it would bother me. But it's really clean glass. There is a hue to it, but it's not the blue tint that a lot of people complain about. So already, daytime obviously, and then low light, and then night vision, excellent performance from the optical side, how it performs. As far as durability goes, getting into that conversation, I did a lot of one-handed manipulations. I left a lot of paint on this gun during those manipulations. And I just don't think, short of using a hammer in a one-handed manipulation, you're going to be able to dislodge or disturb the zero on this gun. Of course, the caveat or the final tale, or what a lot of people watch these videos for. I mean, my duty testing is very comprehensive, but most people just focus on the drop testing. And I think some of that is some of the stuff I test, if nothing goes wrong, I don't even film it because it's kind of boring. Like the heat and cold testing, things like that. I do a lot of one-hand manipulation testing. I throw a little bit of video of that in there, but even that can be repetitive and boring. But it is something that I do on the schedule of my duty testing, which is completely subjective. Drop testing. One drop, shoulder height, every 500 rounds. The purpose behind the drop test is to deliver sudden impact to the gun. It isn't necessarily saying someone's going to drop their gun, although people do. It's to simulate a hard shock taken to the gun with the environment. And it's a little bit chaotic because the only consistency is how I hold it at shoulder height. It's not like a drop jig or anything like that, but life is chaos, so I like that. So every 500 rounds that gun gets dropped. Did it maintain zero? Well, first, let me show you a 5-round group I fired for zero confirmation. This is 25 yards back supported, shooting 124 grain gold dot. And here's your drop tests. And finally, the moment of truth. A final 5-round group fired after the last drop test, 25 yards, bag supported, 124 grain gold dot. That zero maintained, also pretty accurate gun. I was pretty surprised with the mil-specedness of that, because mil-spec MOA is usually not as good as general market, civilian, commercial market MOA. Overall, it is a really fantastic optic. The design is, I think, really good. The bad thing is the mounting interface, and that's kind of the deal breaker for a lot of shooters. Another deal breaker is the price. MSRP is, well, you can find them, they're out of stock, but you can find them on the SIG website for $800 plus. That is a lot of money, especially when there's other enclosed optics that may check the boxes that you need checked. So I think that there's a little bit of clout involved in this optic, so much more than there is it doing anything better than anything else, and is it worth the expense? And don't get me wrong, I like the optic. I like it a lot. Would I buy another one? Probably not, because obviously the footprint is super proprietary, and it's kind of cost prohibitive when there's other enclosed optics that do kind of the same thing. So I've spent this whole video telling you just how impressed I am with this optic, and I'm not telling you not to buy it. I'm telling you that that's expensive. And if SIG can bring that price down, that's going to be fantastic. And I think that'll definitely make, if they could drop the price $200, it's definitely going to be a big contender for that enclosed optic category. Obviously, the Desert Tan is very appealing to some people. The mounting interface is going to have to be dealt with either with some kind of plate system that you can mount it to your modular OEMs, like your SIGs and your EMOS and Walter PDP or whatever else people are using these days. Obviously, Dawson will make plate for it or something like that. If they can get a plate interface to work and maybe offer it in black as well as in Desert Tan, because that's going to get you two demographics right there. I would like OD Green too. Then it's a contender. But the price point is, people are going to look at it and they'll be like, what is it doing that this optic isn't doing? Instead of just being like, well, these both optics perform just as well, I'm going to go with the less expensive one, which is the conversation that most people have in their head when they're buying an optic. They're like, I could get away with spending a little bit less money if this optic checks the same amount of boxes as this optic checks, saying I like it better because of whatever reason. So the cost is really going to hold this optic back from being popular. And hopefully SIG, if they are going to release a civilian version or a commercial version of this optic, they've released optics that are based off of this optic, but none of them are enclosed. So hopefully we do see that in the future. I really hope so, because I think it's a fantastic optic. The window size is good. Obviously the low profile, the durability is obviously there. It's got good refresh rate, good battery life, good features. It checks a lot of great boxes, but it's just too expensive. So I'm Eric Allen with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.